now. If you haven't already started.
I graded the last round. If you're not happy with your grade, if you keep doing them, it'll change. I'll do now.
Okay, so we're going to give you all a few minutes to do those, and then we're going to go over the answers. And my name is Miss Birch. If y'all have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. Birch. Birch.
I'm all in the audience. Redo the audience.
If y'all are talking, I'm assuming y'all are done, right? Y'all got both the answers? All right, let me know when y'all are ready. I'll give y'all a little bit more time. All right, y'all ready?
Yeah.
Okay, so number one, what's the acronym for the causes of World War II, and what does each letter stand for? What's the first one?
Aggression. Yeah. First one is aggression.
Okay.
Two, sister.
No, my friend. No.
Okay, what's the second one?
Totalitarian.
T for totalitarianism. All right. Anybody know the next one? E. E is right. What's it stand for?
Economics.
Very close. Economy.
Oh.
Same thing. All right, the next one? It is A. Does anybody know what it stands for?
Appeasement.
Good job. Okay, and the final one, what's the letter? R? All right, does anybody know what that stands for?
Appellation.
What was that?
Appellation.
Good job. Okay. All right, number two. Why did Britain, France, and the other allied nations at first stick to a policy of appeasement when dealing with Adolf Hitler in Germany? A is right. They hoped to avoid a second major war in Europe. Okay, so we're going to talk about how the U.S. prepares for war and how they prepare their economy for war. Okay, so I remember last week we talked about Hoovervilles, when President Hoover was president, and that was during the Great Depression. So when FDR was elected, he was very popular because he had a plan. It wasn't even specific, but the American population was all for FDR because he had a plan. He was the only president to serve more than 2 terms because he was so popular. And you can see just how popular he was on these maps. That's very popular. That doesn't happen a lot. Okay. What was the U.S. lending, selling, in the cash and carry and the lend-lease programs? Y'all know?
Make more jobs in the Great Depression.
That's right, but what were we lending and leasing? What were we sending out?
What do they need?
What did they need? What did the Allies need?
Weapons.
Weapons. Good job. So that's what the cash and carry and lend and lease programs were for. FDR began these programs partially to create more jobs and to help out with the Great Depression. So you can see on this map, all these lines were sending weapons and other goods to all of these places. So our economy is going to boom just from that. Okay, so the U.S. government creates 2 agencies to prepare for war. The first agency is the Office of War Mobilization. So President FDR created this to coordinate all agencies and resources involved in the war effort during World War II. So you can see this woman. I found a job where I fit best. They're making use of everybody who lives in the country. We all need to participate in order to win the war. Okay. So he says that the U.S. must become an arsenal of democracy. What's an arsenal? Can y'all tell me?
A weapon stack, like.
Yeah, anybody else? Yeah, basically it's a collection of weapons. So in his quote, what he means is, we're the arsenal of democracy because all of the weapons that we produce are helping in the war. So our arsenal is the storage of everything we're making, and we're helping them win the war that way. So we're soon outproducing the Axis powers. The U.S. manufacturers split their time between making consumer goods, like regular supplies that they usually make, and war supplies that were desperately needed for us to win the war over there. So why do y'all think Americans were able to outproduce the Axis powers in our factories? Any ideas? Where was the war fought?
Europe.
Okay, so it wasn't fought here. So why do you think we were able to outproduce them?
Yeah, because you're not fighting any wars, right? You're off the turf.
We were neutral.
Right.
Neutral.
Okay. We weren't exactly neutral, but where we weren't getting bombed like the other factories were in Europe. So because we were able to avoid that, we were able to mass produce things way more than they were. Okay. The Office of War Mobilization would shift the country from a peacetime to a wartime economy, sometimes loaning smaller factories the money needed to convert to war production. And this is very interesting because, for example, it says the company Kleenex, they make tissues, they made 50 caliber machine guns during the war. And stocking manufacturers made parachutes instead of stockings. So everything was turned into, what can we use this for to win the war? That's what everyone's mindset. Okay, another example is instead of making cars, Ford Motor Company was to produce bombers and jeeps. Bombers are warplanes. And also something that's interesting, this is an all-female crew. I don't believe that they flew the plane. Maybe they took part in manufacturing it, but this is the first time that women entered the workforce in America in mass. So that's pretty significant for this time. Okay, one of the biggest changes on the U.S. home front during World War II was that jobs were much easier to find. As a result of war production, they needed everybody to help. The U.S. began to come out of the Great Depression, and y'all can see on this little chart how much the unemployment rate is going down after 1939. It goes down quite significantly. Okay. The second agency that the U.S. set up to prepare for war is the Office of Price Administration. Okay, so this administration was established to create price controls on products. They were also in charge of rationing, which was limiting particular foods and other goods, often during wartime, to ensure the military had enough supplies. So they had these things called ration coupons to help conserve raw materials that they needed for the military. So during this time, if any of y'all had grandparents or family members that were around during this time, if you ask them about World War II, they will remember rationing. So every American household got a coupon book type thing, and you could remove the coupons and they would be good for certain products, like sugar, meat, cooking oil, canned foods, things like that. And you could only get what the coupon was good for, because they really had to ration supplies so that the army would get what they needed. Okay, the men are drafted. The Selective Service and Training Act required all males aged 21 through 36 to register for military service. 5 million men volunteered for service, but that was not nearly enough, so they sent another 10 million over there. So that's 15 million men just from the United States. Americans who served in the military called themselves GIs, or government issue, because they were essentially government issue. They didn't volunteer, they were sent. So these GIs went through about 8 weeks of basic training before they went into combat.
What if you didn't want to volunteer?
If you didn't want to volunteer, they drafted you. You had to. Everybody, all the men back then were in the war. My grandma remembers, she says, when everybody came back from the war, that's when they were finding their husbands, because everybody was gone while they were fighting. Okay, now what? The Women's Auxiliary Army Corps took over many duties men did in the military. Not combat, not yet. About 250,000 women served in the military during the war. As men were drafted, women stepped up to fill jobs left vacant. So women entered the workforce for the first time en masse, which was pretty significant. And then there were a lot of other people who helped fill the jobs too. It wasn't just women. So President Roosevelt issued the Executive Order 8802, or the Fair Employment Act, which prohibited racial discrimination in all industries doing war-related work. So any company that was producing goods for the war, anything war-related, they could not discriminate. They had to hire who they could hire. And African Americans needed jobs, and they got them. So nearly 500,000 African Americans joined the military. At first, black troops were limited to supporting roles, non-combat. However, as casualties kept happening, people kept dying, we reluctantly gave African Americans the opportunity to fight. So when given this opportunity to fight, African Americans fought in segregated units. One such unit was the Tuskegee Airmen. These brave soldiers became the first African American flying unit in the U.S. military. They trained in Tuskegee, Alabama. They won many awards for bravery, and they never lost a pilot. That's huge. That's a big deal. So, y'all think they're a good team? They never lost a pilot? Pretty effective, right? Right, squad. You can see it. All right. Okay, now we're just gonna take a little break, 5-10 minute break, and then Miss Moncada is gonna come and finish the lesson for y'all.